Hi, everyone, and welcome to this chat, Composers Chat. This is the first of two talks we do as the Grass Atelier, where we've invited South African composer Neo Muyanga to talk with us today. And there'll be a Swiss part to this in a couple of weeks. But the idea is that Neo's kindly given us some time, and we're going to be talking about making music and his work, as he's been a source of much inspiration, at least for the South African contingent here. So welcome, Neo. Thank you so much for joining us and giving up some of your precious time. I know you are pretty much the busiest person I know, so we really appreciate it.
It's great seeing you. It's great catching up with you both of you, and to meet the two colleagues from other parts. Hello.
From other parts.
Likewise. I knew.
In real life, this would have been, in not COVID times, this would have been a physical tour where we were hoping to have this conversation in front of obviously other people, and there would be, there'd be an audience and there'd be some engagement, like public engagement with your music and our ideas, and also our music. But yeah, now it's a Zoom call, so as everything is at the moment. Maybe I'll just start us off and ask you if you could tell us a little bit about your entry into music. I think Galina and I kind of know, but for people who are maybe not so familiar with your work, how you started playing music and making music.
Yes, I would describe myself as, a compulsive musician. It's something I had to do, not so much something I chose to do. It feels like I grew up, I think, in a very musical house in a musical country. Everybody where I grew up sings. Nobody at the time that I knew did it or ever had done it professionally. And the whole village where I grew up in Mofolo South was full of choirs, full of protest song, and full of songs for weddings, songs for being bored, songs for the birth of a child, the song for the passing of a loved one. So the making of song was always something very natural. In fact, that was one of the reasons why I didn't immediately think I'd make music my profession. It just felt a bit silly. To this day, there are people in my family who say, what do you do? And when I tell them, they say, oh, that's cute, but why would anyone pay you for that? So there's very much a common access to song, but I think in a particular way. And so I began to make music as a way of seeing the world and of analyzing what I was feeling and what I was seeing around me, breaking things apart in order to put them back together in a way that reflected what else I'd like to see, what else I'd like to investigate. So in that sense, it became very essential at some point after I'd become a minor celebrity and a pop singer. I had to do that for funding, as we say. I realized that I actually had to go more formally into understanding the mechanics of what song making was all about. So I started studying and I started associating with people who were great influences, voices like Frank Lepa, who was the songwriter from Sanko Mota, the band, who I happened to meet on the night all the South Africans in exile voted in Birmingham in '94.
Crazy.
And then we stayed up all night and we drank and we spoke about music. They had been playing the whole night, all the songs from my youth. So we spoke about guitar, we spoke about the meaning of the voice of where he was from, Lesotho, and how he adjusted or had to adjust certain things in South Africa. Of course, we are cousins, we are related people. And started through the guitar to understand my work as part of Black Sunshine, but also the acoustic guitar as an instrument that also lived on the minds that people who worked underground would use to remember home. So Maskanda music, Zulu music, urban Zulu music became a very strong feature in my life, and people like Busim Hlongo were very influential for me. And then I transitioned when I left Joburg in that world of I guess the social, that kind of popular aesthetic of, I mean, I call it petty celebrity, not to be dismissive. It was just not a place I ever felt right in. I had other questions about long form song making, songwriting. I had lots of curiosity about the orchestra as an aesthetic, the idea of the stage, because my first job was working as a song maker for a theatre company in Nottingham. So in a sense, it was going back to where I'd started, and the theatre was a very familiar place to me because I'd worked a lot with actors and directors, and because I'm a terrible actor, music was the way that I communicated the ideas that I had. So when I came to Cape Town at the beginning of the 2000s, I started working a lot at the Artscape Theatre, firstly with jazz art, dance theatre. Jazz art is our oldest African contemporary company on the continent. And I also started working closely with Magnet Theatre. Magnet Theatre is a theatre company, devised theatre company. And what that means is the aesthetic is workshop. So people get on the floor with impulses, with ideas, with a kind of scene in mind, but then they devise the work. So rather than where in the classical tradition, the work is written down first and then interpreted by the actors here, and this is how people performed protest theatre and struggle theatre here, is they devised based on their lived experience, but also they drew from other people's lived experience. And that was something that wasn't entirely improvised, but also was never written down until a season had run and they were happy with what it felt like. And then the script would be written in order to document it and to keep it in a book and to make sure that it could then be replicated afterwards. So these were the impulses that I drew on. And I was at the time reading a lot about orchestration and ideas in composition and understanding the timbre of where the instruments sit in the orchestra. I began working with much interest with opera singers in particular. I'd always thought opera was really ridiculous, firstly because it's so grand and expensive, but secondly, no one could ever be understood. I never know what they're saying. But because I'd studied in Italy, I had a love for the Italian language, and I'd studied madrigal singing with a small troupe. My master, Piero Poclin, took me under his wing. And that was my inculcation into what actually I understood to be folk music, the old folk music of Italy, which of course later then transformed into this grand opera idea. So my entry into opera is very much from the folk end of the work, because that folk end of the work reminds me a lot sonically, but also in terms of aesthetic, to the choirs that I heard sing when I was a child in Soweto, and when I was in Botswana. There were what were called choral competitions, and they were never competitions because nobody ever won anything and no one ever lost anything. It was an opportunity for people to just perform to each other. It's very much how people here at home, we dance in a circle often, for each other, to each other, and there's an expectation in the performance that I'm going to show you my best moves because I know you're going to show me your best moves any moment now. And it's this antiphonal call and response, and then you can go off and do your thing, but generally the circle is where we are, and it's the echo of what are the performers that then becomes the audience, and how that circular motion then informs how we make music. All of these are elements of how I make my own music, really.
I feel like you've answered all the questions and now we can end the call. That was awesome. Okay, there's tons of stuff in everything that you've just said, but maybe Antonia or Beat, do you have a question for Neo?
Right now, I don't have a question, but I was, smiling because this competitive part, like that you know, this call and response, that you want to show your best move or your best singing, and that you do music for each other. I think that is very, in a way, very specific or special. I don't know what's the right word, because I find here, especially where I live in Switzerland, and I work in a school with children where we also sing a lot, and it's somehow it is very competitive in the way that they people don't, you know, they don't want to, they don't have the joy in doing it for each other, like in this very specific moment, right? I don't know if it makes sense. You know, this joy from singing together in the moment, or like singing in a circle and dancing in a circle. I thought it's something that we here, maybe in Switzerland or Germany, we don't have it so strongly. Maybe.
Is it not in your more public kind of song-making tradition? Because I think the interesting thing for me about Europeans is Europeans have believed over the past 200 years this narrative, which was invented, of course, that there are levels to the way we make music, the professional circle, the popular circle, and then amateurs who are amatori, right? It's an interesting word. Amateurs, amatori, people who love the thing, as opposed to professionals who do it out of need, right? But I always think that if you, certainly in Italy, when I lived there, we would attend so-called choir competitions there too. But in fact, those were opportunities to have languid lunches, to drink very bad wine, and then people would start singing to each other, which was very similar to where I came from.
It's so interesting in a way, because so much of what we've explored with this collaboration is the courage to actually try things that you are not the best at, that's not your first and foremost skill, you know. And I think so much of improvisation and exploration is about trying things when you're not the best, having the courage to kind of dive in and just go. And especially like with me, with, you know, production, or with trying bits of new instruments. I'm a terrible bass player, you know, just all these things that I've had to kind of unlearn, that thing of like, until you've mastered 25 years of whatever, you're not allowed to, let alone call yourself a musician, but pick up something new and try something different and have the joy of celebrating it with other people. So that's been an interesting hurdle, I'd say, for the last 10 years of my life, which I still battle with, but
10 years, definitely more, dude.
I mean, I'm only 21.
I would also say more.
But I think something that you said is really important, because I see it in your work, and then I guess, you know, Galina and I have a similar experience, you know, having similar classical training originally, but this thing of divisions and boundaries and the hierarchical nature, especially of classical music, but that filters down into music training and music making just in general here in South Africa, because there is a hierarchy, and people do, you know, parents want their children to learn in a certain way that seems more formal and is completely based on European music making, colonial music making structures, you know. But it's so restricting, or it was for me at least, so restricting and like so joyless that it, as Galina is saying, like, it's scary to cross boundaries or to do something that hasn't, you know, easily been put in one box or another, that you haven't
to be an amateur, essentially, to be an amateur, because until you are, you know, a renowned whatever, you are an amateur. So, and then you're presenting your amateurish stuff, but it might be completely joyful and people might absolutely love it. And then what is the, I'm not saying they do love it, but I mean, they definitely love yours. Audience is a whole other question. We should speak about that later, but
Well, I mean, the loving it part is difficult, because the term composer comes with such baggage. I mean, when I use it, I'm very aware that I deploy it, the good old South African word. I deploy it to remind myself mainly that I exist within a thread, a long, long, long line of people who've done this very seriously. Gifted pictures, gifted feelings, gifted ways of looking, ways of knowing in musical form, so that other people could follow after them and use those elements or incorporate them. And that's what composers do. They kind of put down in strict form the things they're living through, working through. And they have defined techniques and modes and modalities for doing that. And when you learn composition, you learn how those were preset. So the interesting thing about composition is if you look at how people study it, how we study it, it's always premised on a generation that follows another generation that follows another generation. And in that, you're studying how humanity hears and knows, right? We can study national composers, but in fact, all nationalities have been so interpolated, and it's a palimpsest of ways of knowing through the acts of music. And then you've got cultures like yours, Cara, instrument makers who live in particular villages, live in a particular style, and so therefore perform music of a particular kind, and that informs the compositional style. And then there are other people who come from all parts of the world to try and study Swazi music or Swati music or Swati culture. And it's though it's not written down, it's collected in this archive of knowledge, which is passed down from person to person to person. Which is why when you speak again in the European tradition of the maestro, the master, right? It's the similar thing, the master versus the student, as opposed to the master versus the slave. Although I suspect there is a relationship to that language, which I'd be happy to speak about in more detail. So I think for me to use the term is not so much to claim the grandiosity, it's to claim the lineage actually, and to explode myself, in fact, out of my small little circle of Soweto, which is actually how I hear the world, but informed by all kinds of other things that I've somehow picked up. And I don't even always know how I picked them up, but they live inside of how I hear what note, what chord comes after what other note or chord.
Yeah, I think that's such a, especially the generational thing. I can just speak for Swaziland, Eswatini, that, there's some things that are similar to like the way that you learn about classical composition to how people then perceive themselves as composers on like the Makwe and Swazibo. That there's some kind of lineage, and that compositions, they're things that have been picked up naturally and obviously by performers about their value as someone who does a certain thing, make stuff in that way. And then that's great, but then in some other ways, other aspects of their kind of, and I can generalize because it's a handful of people. It's not like a massive amount of people. It's still a very diverse group of people making music in different ways. But often they're like, a composer's more innovative side, or them being like improvisers, or being able to adapt easily to like lots of different stylistic musical spaces. That stuff gets edited out of the narrative because they're now like, they hold the tradition in this very formal way, even though actually their musical practices and abilities and musicianship is not dissimilar to mine or to any other urban musician who plays an instrument and wants to play with other people who may not play exactly as they do. So it's kind of, there are pros and cons in that case, but a lot of the adaptability kind of gets woven out of all of that, which I think is a shame sometimes. Beat, do you have do you want to jump in?
Yeah. I just wanted to ask whether you could tell us more about how you actually write your music. I mean, do you write them down in like formal, like musical, how do you say that?
Notation?
Yeah, notation, or do you jam, or do you just play and find your way and then grab what you like and make that into a piece? Or how do you generally work when you're writing?
I generally begin with a pen and a piece of paper. I do it in a very kind of formal, old school way, dots and lines, or I do some graphic notation, but I haven't found proper expression for myself in graphic notation. Everything I want to say, I've been very focused for I would say the last, I don't know how long, decade, maybe 15 years or more, on reading up about forms of notation and how the progression in notation has worked, so that I always know how to recreate an effect in the most traditional way. I like tradition. I like the rule-bound squareness of what tradition offers. But I also never think that the music is on the piece of paper. So on the one hand, I'll start doing that and I'll find my melodies and I'll justify it. But then often what happens is I'll try it out in workshop form with musicians who I like. I mean, when I write certain things, I will also think about certain musicians. I mean, there was a period of my life where violin lines I would only write because I was imagining Galina play through them. And it was the only way that I had access to certain melodies. So it's not abstract in that sense. But then I would have to give it to Galina or give it to Cara or give it to other people to play with me or to play on their own for me to judge whether that was actually viable. So that's the one side. But I do also make popular music, and that comes with, I just happen to have a particular instrument and it flows out of me. Some songs have come compacted within the space of one session. Others have taken me 10 years to really feel like I've got something. Right now, because of lockdown, I've re-assimilated into my studio at home. And I love this place. It's my favorite place to hide. And it's a friend of mine often calls it my bat cave. And I can spend days not going out, and I forget to go out quite happily because I've been rewiring the studio. I'm looking at my old instruments, my machines, who are entities I talk to and I have love affairs with. And I've remodeled some of it and I've rewired it. And I've been hearing about this new way of making recordings, which is just to press play and record, and then just to fiddle with everything. That's, I almost said fondle, fiddle with everything that's in the space, and then to see what you get at the end of that recording session. So I've tried elements and versions of that. So I dabble in certain ways and certain modalities for composition, but I often still start with pen and paper, which I love.
Yeah.
Theo Magongoma, who's a singer, a wonderful bass singer, and a friend of mine, heard that there was a stash of old score sheet paper that was being thrown out of the UCT library. And he said, I'll grab some because I know you want it. So it was like a drug deal the other day. I went downstairs, masked everybody, and he had piles and piles of this paper, which I gladly brought up to my house. And people were looking at me like, aren't you supposed to be throwing rubbish out instead of bringing it back in, you know?
Yeah.
So
beautiful.
Can I ask you something? So when we worked on that production in London, I always thought afterwards it was so. I remember you saying, you know, you had been really, really busy, but you know, we I guess for context, it was like a small group of singers. Oh dear, we've lost Antonia. It was a small group of singers, but and you were communicating what you wanted musically to us, you know, in a short amount of time, because we didn't have the luxury of like tons and tons of rehearsing. But what was there were parts that were not fixed in how, this is how I remember it, but you can correct me, in how you communicated it to us. It felt like it wasn't fixed in that it wasn't notated and okay, this is what you wanted here and there. But conceptually, you knew exactly what you wanted. I always thought you seem to be able to navigate this kind of ephemeral space of like conceptually completely tight, like you know exactly what you want, but then you also let the performers take a bit of space or you know, interpret things in some ways. That's how is that how it feels to you? But that's how at least some of the things that I've been involved in or I've attended, I've kind of felt that was the balance that you managed to strike.
Well, thank you for that. I think that's a compliment, and I mean I take it very much as a high compliment, because that is how I feel. I mean it's a road, it's a seesaw, right? And concepts. That's also what it means to be a composer, right? Is you compose things. So I would always come to you with things that are very much nearly there. But you know, the interesting thing is, because I'm interacting with musicians as, first of all, people who know things, and often who know their instrument much better than I do. And secondly, because I'm a living composer, I'm not one of the dead composers that you might like to play. The ability to have conversation is just available. So I've never understood why then I wouldn't enter into a conversation or a debate with musicians to see where things can be set. But of course, I also know musicians, because being one myself, will be very irritated when somebody says, "Oh, just improvise over there," but you have no idea of what you'd like them to improvise around. So out of, I think, taking the connection and the conversation seriously, I will come prepared. That particular project was with Paco Peña, the legend of flamenco music. The funny thing about Paco and me is, you know, I told you about my period of studying the acoustic guitar. While I was working with this theatre company in Nottingham, I also took flamenco lessons because I was starting to investigate classical guitar. And then to understand more, my teacher had said, go and buy yourself the best flamenco records you can find. The first one I bought was Paco Peña, and it had a picture of him at 19. And and the title of the album, it was eponymous, and it said, what did it say? The Incredible Paco Peña. I thought, the guy's incredible at 19. At 19, I thought. And then I met him as an old man who had become even more incredible. He's a great storyteller. It's still one of the masters, like greatest masters of the classical guitar that I've ever heard. He doesn't read music. He claims not to have an idea about how to follow that. But he's like that. He has a very firm idea. He runs a whole flamenco company, and he knows exactly what he needs to have done at every point. So of course, when I approached his work, because I knew that he was so specific about where he had to have everything placed, the part that I was contributing, which was like an interruption, if you like, a response to his call in flamenco, I then had to bring in the style of music from where I was from. And of course, I had to gather people from home who I knew would be able to read the style I intended, so that it didn't mimic what the flamenco style would be. And then what we were left to do in the workshop was decide how we were going to deploy our style and where we were going to deploy it in certain parts. So if you remember, there was almost a split stage. The flamenco company was on the one side of the stage at forefront, and there was a classical choir right behind them, and then there was the Skatamia choir on to the left of the stage. So there were two conductors, and then there was the flamenco choir. So the conductors, we had to coordinate, and then look at the guitarist. Paco is the conductor, really, with his body of that ensemble. So it was this triangle of languages that we were speaking. So in my mind, it was very firmly fixed what needed to happen when. But I also knew that there were voices within my particular grouping that would be reinventing some of the harmonies and would be lengthening and making more elastic some of the things that I had intended in ways that were aligned with the tradition we come from. So that's easy to rely on, because I don't have to know what you're going to do, because I already know what you're capable of doing and how you know the style that I'm talking to, it requires a particular kind of performance in a particular place. So then there's faith, this thing of trust.
Yeah.
No, it's amazing. For certain a compliment, because it's so, it just struck me as like so skillful, and as someone who I often don't know what I want and feel quite like everything's quite messy, and it could go either way, and I could be happy either way. It just always impresses me that you have, it's just so always so conceptually tight, and the end result is so consistently beautiful as well, which is not something I can always say about everything that I do either.
Well, I really wouldn't dare say that about everything that I do. So I mean, I think we all suffer that.
It's an interesting question as well. You're talking about working with performers and having to be responsive to what you know they can do, what you know their preferences are. And I had that experience before, where I kind of assumed that people wanted freedom and that they wanted the chance to bring their own individuality to something. And I realized how wrong I was. I thought I was giving a present by saying, this is free and make of it what you will, and let's try something, and I don't want to prescribe. And then a performer can sometimes see that as, just as laziness, or you don't know what you want. And so that's interesting how much, and I think about it a lot, how much performers actually want that freedom and which ones do. And if they don't want that kind of freedom, do they want to be kind of held in the bosom of a composition and then just find the freedom in interpretation, and which part of them wants to actually learn to be the voice itself? And that's the line that we toe when we're improviser-composers, and we're trying to, it's important for us to be able to compose and play, but not everyone feels that.
Yeah,
or it depends how you frame it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you I don't know, you need to give the musicians a chance to like go into that freedom, and it depends how you frame it. And also it's also something to do with, it's great that we're not all the same. So some people maybe really need to find out with a musician what they want, and others, they have this idea, or they also can hear it. I mean, it's also very interesting how people like feel their hearing inside, like when they do the composition, what you just talked about, or maybe they need to invent it with a group, which I like. Also when we talk about traditions and all these, I still have the feeling that the intention when people compose or do music together can be very different. And some, I feel that it can be very different, even if we do the same things all over the world when we do music, or when we come together and we create this personal intention can be very different.
Yeah. I'm still to this day fascinated by how we could possibly make music with so few elements of variety. So it just by limiting the notes that you're going to use, or the sounds that you're going to use, you can communicate such different music, and the styles from different countries, from different languages come out. I don't understand how that works. How could that possibly be? And yet it works.
Yeah, it's a mystery. I mean, music is still a mystery.
Yeah.
Now there's a PhD in that somewhere.
Ah,
title, Mystery of Music.
We've got one. Yes, we've got the doctor here. Talk to her.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, that's...
Can I ask you though? Because I'm curious how you work as a team. When you say you came together for this album and you were lucky that Galina was around, what was the premise of the work and how was it conceptualized? But then how do you split duties, or what is it that you call it? I'm not sure.
Well, maybe I'll start, but it would be nice to hear from everybody on this. And I can just say, because I was in Switzerland, I guess I was the instigator because I was doing this residency. And actually, I can be honest and say that how it all came together was that I was supposed to be composing tons of music. That was my plan. I had this whole projected plan for the time I was there. And actually, I just got really, really depressed, and I struggled to compose anything. A couple of sketches here and there, I practiced. I just was struggling. But I met up with Beat, I think, kind of early on, and we played together. which was really nice, and it was improvised, so it felt like a good space. Committing things down to paper just was not working for me at that time. And then I met Antonia as well, and then also through like a free improvisation space. And Galina, obviously, long time old friend from way back, tons of different ways of making music together. And she had also been living in Zurich before that. So it was like she had already worked with Beat, and she can say something about that. Anyway, the point is, it kind of came out of failure because I was struggling to compose anything. And I was also grappling with graphic scores, which I had not really done before. And I made a graphic score about home because I was so homesick. So I made a graphic score which was to do with rivers and Swaziland and bird sound and just natural environments, because I grew up in the countryside for a chunk of my childhood, but also in Switzerland, that was like such a comfort to me, was just being around rivers and parks all the time. That's how I kind of got through the time of being quite down. So it was, I think the thing I really like about this group is that it's people that I really like, who all have very different musical interests and, you know, just doing interesting stuff, all different stuff. And on that, it just so happened that Galina could come for this concert, and she had worked with Beat before, and that I could just assemble cool people. And it was a joyous concert of playing the graphic score, which was mostly just like a guide through improvised music, different roles and stuff. It was not very prescriptive. And then I just really enjoyed it. It sounded awesome. Really loved the whole experience. It was like an absolutely joyful concert, and we were filled with lots of delicious French cheese before we even touched an instrument. So it was already a good
and wine
start.
as well. Well, after
and wine, lots of wine. So yeah, and then I think it's just that ease of working with people and knowing that interpersonally there's just a good vibe. Even if we go through different phases and we're kind of interested in different things, you know, we're all just artists doing different things at different times. So yeah, and then we had, you know, the Richard Greenan at Kid Records in London heard some of the live recording from the concert and really liked it, and he kind of encouraged us to put it out as a record. And we had this idea of having remixes, so kind of reprocessing the sounds from that night, as well as having actual live, you know, parts of the record, the actual performance, and having these two sides, one like instant and the other regurgitated. And yeah, but it's the working process has just been kind of easy because of who everybody is. And so this is the new project, which was supposed to be a tour. But I just knew that if we just decided conceptually on how to make certain pieces or who was going to do what, whatever, it would be kind of an easy process of a mix of different responsibilities and roles.
And with the album, what was also interesting to us was in this very kind of, it could be quite serious and taking itself quite seriously, the whole new music, you know, free improvisation scene, almost like a kind of higher elite than classical music, even like new music, because you really can't, I can't swear in, I don't, probably not.
Why not?
All the children watching. Well, no, it's fine, just the moment's passed. It would come out. But we just, the thought of putting produced, you know, music that's more, you know, with kind of more danceable beats and electronic production on this in the same space, and just saying these aren't traditionally, you know, of course, electronic music, especially in the free improv scene, has found its way in a very avant-garde setting, but not always like, hey, this is quite a nice groove, and it's, you know, it hasn't really, they don't always get associated. So for us, we were interested in putting them on the A side and B side of the same album and say, you know, we've got all these different facets to the way we think about music, and it's serious and it's also playful, and, you know, it's considered and it's also throwaway, and it's all part of the same conversation. And so that was a challenge for us, or something we wanted to try and do. So
I think the graphic scores were very important, and for me it was a composition, a very good composition, because for me it was like it were landscapes, and the 4 people of us, we are also like landscapes, and maybe the sounds or also the different approaches to music, it all came together. And I think I think it really pulled us together, your score, and you know, was in German we say the red thread. Is that right? The red
thread, pulling it all together.
something.
The red
Yes,
thread,
yes.
not the red thread.
No.
That's-
No.
No, I just think about
Die
this,
rode
you know,
gevaar.
yeah.
because now with the COVID situation that we couldn't see each other, and then I thought in our project again about this nature, you know, that we all see water, or we all see the sky, you know, even if most of us probably when we're inside and maybe not in the studio, but in most of the rooms where we stuck, we still can see some of the sky, right? Or maybe some grass, or maybe some water. So now I feel that there's a connection to your graphic scores again, actually.
Thank
Great.
you. That's nice. I don't. It came out of such a struggle, but it also, yeah. I guess I've.
But
even
sometimes
in
it's good when you struggle, you know. Sorry.
Probably most of the time, unfortunately. I don't know. Bea, do you want to say something about? Oh, sorry, no. Let me not interrupt you.
No, just on the struggle. I would like to, also just on the struggle. Our producer Russell Pope, who produced the Black Sunshine albums, would always say, if you were in pain, if you were sad about something, or heartbroken, or missing home, or whatever, he'd say, "Oh, that's so bad. Go and write a song about it," because actually he believed it's the struggle that makes the work interesting.
And tension as well. All of those things. All of those things are so important, actually. Yeah.
But do you? I mean, you have. I guess there's an interesting point in this, which is about, you know, music not standing by itself necessarily for a lot of your projects, you know, and it's all the theatrical stuff, I guess, that's the stuff I've seen the most of, apart from Black Sunshine, which in Swaziland was so huge, was literally so huge. It, like, everybody listened to it for so many years. It was like the anthem in Swaziland, that whole album. But it's nice. Is it a comfort, or is it an additional challenge to, especially with theatrical stuff, or thinking about visual things and other disciplines, having that link between music and other things? Because I guess I never have it. I'm the least theatrical person ever. It's just me, you know, occasionally on stage, but playing my instrument only.
I think visually also. If I wasn't making music, I'd probably paint. And I've always drawn and I've always painted. In fact, when I make my own stage productions, and some of which I've directed, I've also made sets through animations, or I have literally designed sets. And then a maquette maker would help me kind of construct it like that. So the visual way of thinking is also, for me, a very strong part of how I know things. And I make installations. So the sound is the primary thing that I hear and speak through, but the installations will live either as video or as kind of graphics in a particular way. I am very interested in that, and the way I see for stage is very informed by how I've worked with really incredible directors, incredible choreographers, actors and dancers, and costume designers. All of that knowledge has kind of come to really matter in my global practice, I guess. And by global, I don't mean the world. I mean my little inside globe. And so that's, it's very much how I feed. I'm very curious about images. I'm curious about sound. I'm curious about material. I'm curious about ideas generally that can lead to better and better storytelling.
Memory of How It Feels, of course, that I played in your production. Was it 2010?
That was 2010, yeah.
2010.
That I remember.
Boy, that's a long time ago. Wow.
Yeah, that's a while.
But that was a play. That was a play essentially with
some music. Yeah.
Have you been writing more words recently, more kind of dialogue and scripts?
I thought of that recently because I do have a story that I'm cooking up. I'm not sure what it's going to be yet. But, that dialogue was all musical. So if you remember, the actors were struggling with how metric it had to be, particularly the scene with the two men, because it was an interplay and it was written in a kind of, almost gibberish Zulu English, which was legible to the audience and to the people, but it wasn't grammatically correct. So the way I came to that was through kind of a musical ear. So the dialogue for me always works very much like sound, and you can abstract it to certain levels. But yes, it was, some people did read it just as a play, and you can in fact read the script as just a play. So I write libretti also I've written a number for some operas or oratorio, and that is something I enjoy a lot. I've never written text for somebody else to write music to. Maybe that's a new thing to aim for. Who knows?
And just on the question of those, I remember in that play, some of the words or the conversations were so vivid and they felt so lived in and so real. I mean, were any of those texts or those bits of dialogue kind of lifted from real life, or were they all from your imagination? Like, I was thinking about this recently because a conversation we had inspired the film that I made, and then I thought, well, that was actually something you said to me. Actually, yeah.
I love that film. I found it crazy and weird, but also, and you're a great actor. I mean, but of course you come from that stock. So I was thinking, oh, why am I surprised? I should not be surprised because I was expecting your violin to come out or your electronic stuff to come
I
out.
avoid violin at all costs these days, really. But how much do you feel guilty about just lifting from life, or how much do you feel like you're just stealing from life when you kind of say things verbatim, and then how much do you think you have to kind of cloak it in some artistry?
Yeah, that in particular was the first time I thought about that very, very carefully, and also thought about the ethics of it. So that scene with the two men, it's myself and Chico Antonio, actually, real life event. I had heard about Chico Antonio and his madness. Chico Antonio is like a mythical character. He's like a ghost in Maputo. A very well-known musician who, during the Civil War, stopped making music because he said, until my land is free, I will not just be making fun. So he went and became a revolutionary and a fighter. And then after that, he came back to music after the war had been won, to music. But he's a very sour character. He's a very difficult man just to sit next to. He's a very difficult man. And I'd heard his music and I forever wanted to go and meet him. So I was in Maputo this one time. I'd put out the word to everybody I knew in town to say, I want to meet Chico Antonio. And everybody said, what? You want to meet who? You're not going to have a good time. I said, no, I really want to meet him. And then word came back to me a few days before I left to say, Chico Antonio will meet you, and it will be at this club, and it'll be at this time. Come prepared to buy him drinks. So I went, and I took a tape recorder, and I said, para Chico, I have great respect. Before we even walked into the club, I said, the favor is I'd like to spend the whole night with you. I brought a tape recorder. I'm going to record what we do, and then I'd like to use it artistically. I'd like to use your words. And he must have thought I was crazy or ridiculous. It's like he didn't answer yes or no. He just said, come, and he walked into the club. Now, because he's a local, he didn't pay at the door. There was a bouncer, but the bouncer just let him in. And I realized, oh shit, I've got to follow him. So I walked and I tried to go in, and the bouncer said, no, we don't know you. I said, well, how much does it cost? He said, no, it's a private function. And so I waited there for a while. And then he came 15 minutes later to fetch me. But actually, we walked through the club, and I remember thinking, everybody's looking at me like I've landed from space. And I suspected it was because I was going to hang out with the guy nobody wanted to hang out with. And we walked right through the club. It was quite a long, meandering kind of walk, because I think he wanted people to see. But we walked to the back of the club. And there he had drinks, and he had his pipe, and he said, where's your tape recorder? So I showed it to him, and then he said, switch it on. So I switched it on, and then we spoke. We spoke for literally, I think, 9 hours. And he was telling me all kinds of stories about his life and why he'd gone here and done that. And I was asking questions, I was interjecting. And I culled parts of that into a story about two men who fall in love suddenly on one night. So it just came out of that, literally.
Amazing.
Oh, that's great.
Amazing.
That sounds
Love that
amazing.
show.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was cool. It was fun.
It was incredible. Guys, I'm realizing that time is passing. Are there any last like comments or questions?
What are your next plans after like this COVID thing is over? Do you have anything planned for the future? Do you have any performances lined up?
Yeah. If you'd asked me this a year ago, I would have had many easy ideas to tell you. What's happened to me over this period of COVID is I've become increasingly aware of how difficult plans are to make. So I have little projects that I'm making here, some of which I'll be able to share in bits and bobs as we go. One of which is a new opera that I've written that will open, inshallah, in November in Amsterdam with the Dutch National Opera and Ballet. So that's my most immediate plan, but it's also something I'm literally working on a daily basis. I usually would have plans like 2 years, 3 years from now. There are vague things on the horizon, but I can't even speak about them because they are difficult to pin down in terms of when exactly and for how long. But there are planned operas. There's a new opera in the offing that I will make, but I first have to find a story that I want to tell. So I will do that, and it's with a friend, a brilliant director who's an artist in Berlin, Grada Quilomba. And then there are projects that I'm making in the studio that I've come back to and fallen in love with again. So I'm making things here which I don't have a name for yet. We'll see. And then, then I don't know what's going to happen next year. I have no idea. Do you?
No. I mean, for 2020, I had so many tours lined up in Asia and in Africa and in the States, and everything got canceled, and now it's like a blank sheet of paper. I mean, I have no tours this year lined up, so let's see.
We don't want to jinx it by making plans, almost like if we say something like that, we're just going to usher in the next pandemic. So let's just keep it open, I guess.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Cara, I noticed I swore. Will you edit?
And only if you feel strongly about it. I can do a little doot.
No, I don't have strong feelings. No.
Okay, good. I don't either. Guys,
Galina was worried about the kids, so I thought maybe I should just make a gesture.
I feel like they might not be our target audience. I'm not sure. The nitty-gritty of like composition. I feel like we might miss out on the under 12s.
You underestimate the under 12s.
Yeah, maybe maybe that's just a sign that I'm really, really out of touch with the youth. Oh dear.
It's great to meet you guys. And I look forward to hearing more of your things, and hopefully we can meet at some point.
That would be really lovely. That would be really lovely. No, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll be in touch and speak soon.
Yeah.
As those very ephemeral plans hopefully, come down, and you can't even say anything about COVID, because even now with the vaccine situation here, it's like, I don't know, you got to be very much in the moment at all times, because things may not change for a while.
Completely.
Anyway, okay,
be
guys.
Be well. Blessings follow
you too. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.